and Washington paid for those yen with euros out of its own reserves, which is not how this has ever been done. $50 billion. One Friday. And that's where this gets dangerous. A forced seller that size in that market this year is the thing the American Treasury least wants to see. Nobody puts out that kind of reassurance unless somebody was already worried. America used money America cannot create. Governments don't build workarounds for problems they consider impossible. So the door is the confession. $50 billion. And the market gave most of it back inside a week. Japan needs America. America needs Japan to stay still. The sanction didn't fail. It trained its replacement. In 2026, America is the borrower. The speeches said alliance. The plumbing said dependency. On Friday, July 31st, the United States Treasury walked into the currency market and bought a huge amount of currency. Not dollars, yen. And Washington paid for those yen with euros out of its own reserves, which is not how this has ever been done. Currency traders saw that and stopped what they were doing immediately. Neither government announced it that day. It came out the following Monday, with Japan's finance minister Satsuki Katayama making the statement in Tokyo and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirming it in Washington. Central bank data suggested that Japan may have spent as much as $36.5 billion in one day. The American side reportedly put in around $14 billion on top. $50 billion. One Friday. Keep the receipt. We're coming back to it. Both governments then said they are ready to do it again, which is not a courtesy. It's a shot fired across the bow of anyone betting against the yen, and you only fire that shot if you expect to be back. They don't do this casually. The last time America and Japan bought yen together was 1998. The last time they coordinated on currencies at all was 2011, after the Fukushima earthquake. And that time they were pushing the yen down rather than holding it up. 28 years. Then Friday in July. The coverage told you the yen was collapsing. Almost none of it told you why. And the cause is the whole reason $50 billion was never going to be enough. The yen hit 163.73 against the dollar on Thursday, the weakest it's been since 1986. By Friday afternoon, it was back to 157.57. Underneath that is one of the great money machines of the modern world. Borrow Japanese money for almost nothing. Buy American assets with it. Pocket the difference. Sophisticated? Sure. It's also basically borrowing from your uncle at 0% and putting the cash in savings across town. Except the banks and the funds and the insurers did it with trillions. And every single one of them has to sell yen to do that. That trade has been running for decades because Japan held its interest rates near zero while America stayed much higher. And money goes where it gets paid. Then add the new government. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is spending heavily, which means borrowing heavily, and investors get nervous about a currency when the country behind it keeps adding to its debts. So the yen has been sliding since 2012. This summer, the slide turned into a fall, which puts Tokyo in a corner. To hold up your own currency, you go into the market and buy it. And to buy something, you have to sell something else. So what does Japan sell? Japan doesn't have a room full of dollar bills. What Japan has is about $1.2 trillion of American government bonds. A bond is a formal IOU. The American government borrowed money and promised to pay it back later, with fixed amount of interest along the way. Japan owns more of those IOUs than any country on earth. Britain is second, China is third. So when Tokyo needs cash dollars in a hurry, it has to find somebody willing to buy those IOUs. It has to sell American debt. And that's where this gets dangerous. The next 30 seconds are the line between people who understand bond markets and people who just have opinions about them. Most people get this backwards. Once you have it, You'll never read a financial headline the same way again. Bonds trade like anything else. Price goes up when buyers crowd in, price drops down when a big seller shows up. And when a bond's price falls, the return on that bond goes up. That return is called the yield. Think about why. The bond pays a fixed amount every year and that number never changes. So if you buy the same bond for less money, you're collecting the same payment for a smaller outlay. Your return is higher. Lower price, higher yield. Two ends of the same seesaw. Big seller shows up, Washington swears. Here's why Washington swears. America isn't finished borrowing, and it never will be. It has to replace old debt as it comes due and issue new debt on top of that every month at whatever the market is charging that week. The yield is the price America pays for money. When it climbs, every new dollar Washington borrows costs more, and interest on the national debt starts eating a bigger share of the budget, crowding out everything else the government wants to do. It doesn't stop at the government, though. The yield on American government bonds is the reference price for borrowing across most of the developed world. Mortgages get priced off it. Corporate loans get priced off it. Every company that borrowed heavily to build data centers for artificial intelligence is sitting right on top of it. So put it together. Japan's currency is falling. To defend it, Tokyo needs dollars, and the dollars are locked inside American IOUs, and the ordinary way to get them is to sell. A forced seller that size in that market this year is the thing the American Treasury least wants to see. Which brings us to the sentence nobody in the press bothered to read twice. On the same Monday, Japan's finance minister added a technical note to its statement saying it plans to use something called FIMA repo facility. That phrase is built to make your eyes slide off it. Stay with me because it's the whole story. The Federal Reserve runs a window where foreign central banks can walk in, hand over their American government bonds, borrow dollars against them for a short period, and get the bonds back afterwards. They get the cash, they keep the bonds, and nothing gets sold. A strategist at State Street said publicly that this announcement may matter more than the intervention itself because it tells the market Japan can raise dollars without selling American debt. Look at what actually happened there. Two governments went out of their way in public to reassure the world's bond traders about something none of those traders had asked about. Nobody puts out that kind of reassurance unless somebody was already worried. Japan's central bank has had access to that window since 2020. Nothing was built last week. Monday's announcement was theater, staged for bond desks. Now, the euros. To buy a currency, you have to sell another one. There is no other way to do it. The American Treasury keeps a pot of foreign money for exactly this purpose, called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and it holds mostly euros and yen. Last Friday, Washington reached into that pot and sold euros to buy yen, around $14 billion worth, according to a former Treasury official who tracks these flows closely. Bessent confirmed the operation, and reports say the New York Fed asked major banks to check the euro-yen rate that morning. This surprised the market because coordinated intervention has always been funded with dollars. Every time. Maybe it was just about appearances. Currency strategists at Bloomberg think Washington didn't want to be seen deliberately pushing its own currency down after decades of telling the world it supports a strong dollar. Selling dollars in public would have made that sound like theater. Fair enough. Except that leaves a worse question. What kind of operation has appearances important enough to change which currency you sell? Robin Brooks at the Brookings Institution sees something uglier in it. He used to do this work at major investment bank, and his argument is that using euros actually weakens the whole thing because it invites the market to ask why America didn't simply fund it with dollars. His answer is that investors may conclude American officials were trying to spare Japan from having to sell American government bonds. A senior economist in public saying the shape of this operation looks consistent with Washington wanting pressure kept off its own bond market. That's his reading of the evidence. Nobody admitted anything. And neither explanation makes the last part go away. America used money America cannot create. The fund isn't bottomless. Every euro spent is a euro gone. Washington can print dollars all day and it can't print a single euro or a single yen. And on Friday, it chose to spend the finite kind of currency. A defense of American interest rates run through Tokyo paid for in European currency. Start with the obvious change. Washington intervened in a foreign currency at all, and it's the second time in under a year. Last autumn, the same Treasury used the same fund to help hold up Argentina's peso ahead of that country's elections. Argentina drew $2.5 billion and paid it back in full. Analysts at ING pointed out that Argentina and Japan together suggest a Treasury increasingly willing to use this fund for wider economic and political goals. Two interventions after decades of near silence. Unusual. But that isn't the part that bothers me. The FIMA statement bothers me because it was aimed at bond desks and nowhere else. Its message was, don't position for Japanese selling. It isn't coming. We have built a door around it. One investor put it bluntly and said, the two finance ministries have turned the yen into a weapon because the point now is to frighten the market rather than move a price. And even that isn't the strangest part. Governments don't build workarounds for problems they consider impossible. So the door is the confession. Nobody spends a Friday and a $50 billion, then announces a special facility over a scenario they think is unthinkable. Somebody has already worked out what Japanese selling could do to the American bond market. And Besant isn't finished. He's now publicly pushing the Federal Reserve to make that facility bigger. And he said he's glad Japan wants to draw on it. The cap right now is $60 billion per country per day. He wants it raised. Now, did any of it work? Analysts at HSBC and ING both argued that intervention repairs nothing by itself. Go back to why the yen is falling. Japanese rates are still low. Japanese spending is still high. Neither changed on Friday. Unless the Bank of Japan starts raising rates faster, buying yen is a speed bump on a road that keeps going downhill. Which brings me back to that receipt. By August 7th, 1 week after the intervention, the yen had slipped back past 158. $50 billion. Two governments. The first joint operation in 28 years. And the market gave most of it back inside a week. That's why they say they are ready to do it again. They know. For 70 years, the arrangement looked one way. America supplied the security and the currency. Japan supplied the savings. And Japan pushed its trade surplus into American government bonds decade after decade. Everybody called that Japanese dependence on America. Then the pile got big enough to flip that sentence. Japan needs America. America needs Japan to stay still. Some people will say this is just allies cooperating and there is nothing new there. That misses what changed. Allies have cooperated for 80 years. The direction of the pressure changed. In 1998, America stepped in to help stabilize a region in crisis. In 2026, America stepped in knowing that trouble in its creditors' currency could land inside its own bond market. Same action. The problem it was solving had moved. Others will say Japan would never eventually sell because dumping American bonds would wreck Japan's own reserves. Correct. Japan probably doesn't want to sell. Irrelevant. The nightmare was never Tokyo deciding to sell. The nightmare is Tokyo needing to sell. Intent disappears from the picture, and the bonds still hit the market. The euros, the Fed window. Two different tools, one fear. And if this were only happening in currency markets, you could call it a one-off. The same week, Washington was buying yen, an American ally on the other side of Asia was quietly building an escape route out of American control. On August 5th, Reuters reported that South Korea's two biggest chip makers, Samsung and SK Hynix, have been testing Chinese factory equipment for their plants inside China. Three sources. The testing reportedly started about 2 years ago. Samsung denied it, saying it has never tested that equipment and never considered it. SK Hynix hasn't confirmed it either. So take it as reported, not established. The situation that produced the story isn't in dispute at all. In 2023, Washington gave those Korean factories inside China a special status, letting them bring in controlled American equipment without applying every time. In 2025, Washington took that status away and handed them a 1 year license instead. Permanent permission became annual permission. What worries those companies is the equipment already bolted to their factory floors. Restrict the servicing and the spare parts, and the factories stop running. American leverage here works only while there is no plan B. So, what happens when you threaten plan A often enough? You finance plan B. Not directly. You just frighten your own customer into testing it. A Chinese supplier gets a trial, then another one, then somebody in a procurement meeting notices the cheaper machine is good enough. Deutsche Bank estimates four Chinese equipment makers will each pass $1 billion in revenue this year, and together take 25 to 30% of China's $28 billion market for this equipment, with machines that reportedly run 20 to 30% cheaper. The limits are real. Chinese firms still can't build the machine needed for the most advanced chips, and that stays blocked. Taiwan's TSMC is reportedly moving the other way and phasing Chinese tools out. So this is a narrower claim than China winning and a more useful one. The sanction didn't fail. It trained its replacement. We've seen this film once before. The country had nuclear weapons, an empire, one of the largest navies in the world. Troops on the ground who had taken what they came for. None of it mattered. Washington reached for the money and they came home. Suez, 1956. Britain and France moved to take back the canal, and militarily it worked. Financially, it didn't survive the week. Britain was under heavy pressure on the pound and needed international financial support to hold it, and the United States made clear that support wasn't arriving while British troops stayed in Egypt. Britain pulled out. Historians usually mark that as the moment Britain stopped being an independent great power. In 1956, America was the creditor and Britain was the borrower, and the creditor set the terms. In 2026, America is the borrower. Now, that doesn't turn America into Britain in 1956. The dollar gives Washington room Britain never had, and nobody is about to order an American president to go home now. What changed is which way the dependency runs. One more thing about the man who ran Friday's operation. 34 years ago, Scott Bessent was 29 years old and working for the team that shorted the British pound and broke the Bank of England. He spent his career finding currencies governments couldn't hold. Now he's on the other side of the trade, holding one up. Yes, this eventually reaches your mortgage. Your rate is set at home, but your home bond market doesn't live in a sealed box, and when American long-term yields climb, borrowing costs generally get pulled the same way. Anybody renewing in the next 2 years has money riding on this. Higher yields also mean a bigger share of your taxes going straight to lenders instead of anywhere useful. And if you hold a normal balanced retirement account, bond funds fall when yields rise. So part of it sits directly in this market. Fine. That's the boring part. What interests me is what happens to a government that starts arranging its foreign policy around keeping its creditors comfortable. Trade policy, alliance policy, what you're willing to say and about whom and how loudly. A country that has to stay pleasant to the people holding its paper has fewer choices than a country that doesn't. And it makes those choices more slowly, and it makes them with one eye on the bond screen. Money is getting more expensive. So is political freedom. Currency is the surface here. Underneath it is how much room a government has left. So, how do we find out whether any of this is right? Don't watch the speeches. Watch whether Japan actually touches that Fed window. Announcing access costs nothing. Drawing on it is a real event, and if Tokyo taps it, the pressure never went away. Then stop watching Japan's currency for a minute and watch its bond market instead, because that is the one most people will miss. Japan is raising rates after decades near zero. And if Japanese bonds start paying decently at home, Japanese pension funds and insurers have a plain financial reason to bring money back from America. Nobody would announce that. It would just happen slowly on spreadsheets, and it would press on the American bond market for years. There is also a much simpler clock running in the background, and hardly anyone is watching it. The Treasury's foreign currency reserves. That fund isn't bottomless, and everyone who trades for a living now knows Washington is willing to spend it. This keeps showing up in systems that have nothing to do with each other. Europe found out what its dependence on Russian gas was actually worth. Western manufacturers found out what their dependence on Chinese factories was actually worth. Washington is now finding out that financial dependence runs in both directions too. Nobody sat down and designed these relationships as weapons. They turned into weapons because everybody built too much of their own system on top of somebody else's. Power used to mean forcing your opponent to act. Now it means making yourself too expensive to abandon. The trap is that every time you use that leverage, the other side starts building a way around it. America built a world where everybody parks their savings inside American debt, and for 70 years, that was the source of its strength. But everyone who needs you also owns a piece of you. Last Friday, for the first time in 28 years, the United States spent foreign currency it can't print to make sure one of its lenders never had to reach for the exit. Nothing broke this week, but you just watched a country take out insurance against its own creditor. Watch the plumbing, not the speeches. The speeches said alliance. The plumbing said dependency. This is a wrap for today, my friends. I'll see you next week.